It is December 1962 and the town of Obuasi is loud with the business of gold and industry. Cutting through all that noise is a locomotive engine pulling a line of trucks loaded with firewood down the tracks. This train was never meant to carry people, but employees were permitted to climb aboard. Anyone else was prohibited. On this particular afternoon, some unauthorized riders had climbed aboard, hiding themselves between the tracks for a free ride. Two workers were working that train with a specific mandate to keep it from derailing and to keep strangers off it. They were Serechi and his colleague. When they spotted some uninvited riders, they began to push them off. They used aggression to enforce the rules. Among those being shoved was a man who was chewing sugarcane on board, completely unaware of the impending danger. He is pushed and he loses his footing and falls directly onto the rail. Before anyone can react, one of the heavy wooden tracks rolls over him with full force and he dies on the spot. 5 people saw the entire thing play out, including a police officer, and every single one of them tells the same story when they were called to give accounts in court. But when Serechi took the stand, his defense was a clean denial. He stated that he was not even there because he stepped off the train earlier, long before any of that happened. His colleague also gave him support, but he said he was on, but he only noticed trouble when 2 of the tracks derailed. The jury did not believe them, and after hearing the evidence, both men were found guilty of murder and were sentenced to death. But the story did not end there. Serechi and his colleague appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of Ghana, making a single argument that the trial judge had made a mistake on the law. Under Ghanaian law, when evidence could support a lesser charge, then the jury must be given that option to evaluate that charge. In their case, manslaughter was an option, not just murder. They essentially argued that they were negligent, and their negligence amounted to recklessness that was so extreme that human life was disregarded. The judge, in his summing up, never gave the jury that option, and he left them with murder or nothing else. In their view, that omission cost them a fair trial and possibly their lives. The state attorney, D.F. Annan, was not moved by this argument. He stated to the court that the accused persons had thrown a human being onto the rail of a moving train. What did they imagine was going to happen? Death was not an accidental issue here. It was the obvious, inevitable consequence of their actions. Even if the judge had directed the jury perfectly, he argues that the jury would still have come back with murder. And so the Supreme Court had to decide, was there an error? And if there was it so material as to affect their conviction? Justice Olenu delivered the landmark ruling. He explained that homicide in Ghana takes 4 forms. It can be murder, which is the intentional killing of another human being with this deliberate use of force. Manslaughter, where the killing would have been murder, but for circumstances that reduce its gravity, like provocation. Manslaughter in the second form, where the unlawful harm was done, but death was never the intention. And finally, manslaughter in its third form, where criminal negligence was at play. There was no intent to harm anyone, but by recklessness that was so extreme, somebody died. To prove murder, the prosecution had to prove intent, that the accused person meant to cause death or meant to cause harm so serious that death was the natural and probable cause. And they must prove that no reducing circumstances softens what was done. If intent cannot be proven, murder will not stand. And even then, the law does not simply release a person. The judge, even without a separate charge sheet being filed, is required to put manslaughter before the jury as an alternative if the evidence can support it. So was that rule broken here? The Supreme Court looked closely at what the trial judge actually said to the jury. He told them if they believed that death was the natural and probable consequence of pushing a human being onto the rail of a moving train, they may find them guilty of murder. That direction, if anything, actually favored the accused persons, because it meant that if the jury had any reasonable doubt at all about whether the men intended this outcome, they were free to acquit entirely. Any misdirection that existed produced no miscarriage of justice. If anything, it tilted towards the accused. The appeal failed and the conviction stood. What do you think? Follow Superlaw GA Studios for more real stories, real cases, real people.